What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and this is the vlog for Friday, the 22nd of October, 2021. And today I'm going to be talking really briefly about, well, a couple things. First of all, I've had my first solid-state drive failure. This is a Samsung 840 EVO. It's 500 gigs. It had 6.5 years of power on, 6.5 years of power on hours, and I want to say about 30 terabytes written. Now, I don't know how that stacks up against what it should have gotten. Beats me. When I went looked at Samsung's stuff for the 850 or the 840s, the 500 gig models only had that they had a 3-year warranty. I'm not worried about a warranty on it or anything like that. It's like but they didn't list terabytes written at the time. They only listed years. Stepping up a model from the 840 to the 850 for a 500 gig, they're listing it should be about 150, I think it was, terabytes written. I didn't get anywhere near that. But I'm not saying good or bad or anything. This is at least 6 years old. It's probably older than that because it was in a laptop, I think, or a desktop before that. That wasn't powered on all the time. It's been a scratch drive in a server for the past couple of years where it has been powered on all the time. So it has had stuff randomly written to it, etc. Interesting failure mode on that. Was running ZFS. I run ZFS as my file system in my server. I was running ZFS on it, and I would start getting ZFS write errors and checksum errors and read errors. Ran the full smart test on that drive, and the full disk smart test says the drive's fine. So I said, okay, reformatted it, created a new ZFS pool, just started writing zeros to the whole disk. I just wanted to see if the, higher level behavior, higher level operations would give me the same behavior, same results. Maybe it was something screwed up somewhere else. Who knows? And about 90 gig into the ZFS or into the higher level, file system level test, the drive started throwing so many errors so quickly for writes that ZFS actually suspended the pool. Now, it was the only disk in the pool. It's not that big of a deal, whatever. I mean, this is, but definitely was a problem with the drive, even though it hadn't wear leveled that much. It hadn't, or at least according to the data, and it passed the smart tests. So the word of warning here, the word of whatever here is, granted, this was a drive. It was a scratch disk for my video stuff that I use that really just not that important. Nothing stays on there for that long. I only lost, I don't think I even lost a video due to the problems. Just not a huge thing, but a reminder to back up your data. If you're doing something that's important, have redundancy in the form of RAID or something like that for the data that your live data is. But remember, RAID is not a replacement for backup. Have backups, offline backups of your important data, because anything can happen. Drives can die. This one, I don't think, looking at the data that it's telling me or was telling me, I don't see why it should be or should have died at the age and usage that it saw, but it did. And so, just a word of warning, or a reminder, or whatever you want to call it. The second thing I wanted to talk about today is actually, and I'm not going to get too much into the product because I'm not actually that interested in the product because it's way outside my budget. But Red has announced last week or this week their V-Raptor camera. And there was two things that I thought were very interesting when I was going through the specs and stuff on the camera, and they have nothing to do with image quality. Or frame rate, or anything. like that. What it has to do with is the two things are Red has now adopted a industry standard storage format. The V-Raptor uses CFExpress cards instead of Red mags or Red mini mags or whatever the heck they call it. Now, I have no personal experience with Red. I can only talk about what I have seen basically anecdotally from other photographers, videographers, other people who have used or used Red cameras. And one of the things anecdotally that I have seen talked about quite frequently is the reliability of Red mags, or the lack of reliability of Red mags. Red insists that they've spent millions of dollars validating and testing and designing and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they're free to insist whatever they want. I have no doubt that they have spent money on validating, testing, etc., blah, 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 their proprietary media storage. However, when Linus Tech Tips took a Red mag apart that they had that failed, what they found in it was a fairly bottom-of-the-barrel MSATA solid-state drive and a proprietary connector marked up tremendously. And their conclusion was basically that the Red mag failed because Red was using the cheapest possible storage that they could put in it, and, you know, that was it. Which is actually kind of a fitting point, considering what I was just talking about with terms of solid-state drives failing. They do fail. They're not impervious to failure. They can break, or well, first of all, they wear out. They are a limited life product. You should get a lot of rights to them. However, eventually you will wear out the cells and they will no longer be able to store or write data, which is possibly what happened to this 840 that I just showed you, that, you know, for whatever reason, that one part of the drive was being written to significantly and never got remapped the way it was supposed to in the wear leveling. I don't know if this has got the latest firmwares or whatever. So it could have, that one area could have wear leveled out and not been remapped for whatever reason. And, you know, that's it. That's the end of the drive, basically. But it's good to, I think it's really good to see that Red is using a industry standard media. And quite honestly, I would argue that no camera company should use a proprietary, self-developed media format. But if you're a camera company, you should be spending all of your engineering money and budget and time on making cameras, not making media. And even if your idea of making media is repackaging off the shelf or OEM grade media of some sort into your own brand of container, you still shouldn't be doing that. I think the only possible exception that I would make to that thought process of camera companies not making or developing media is Sony. And the reality is that although us photographers and videographers talk about Sony as a camera company, they're a consumer electronics company that happens to make cameras. They made computer stuff, including media, including their own media, way before they bought Minolta and even started making cameras. And as a result, I think they have more in line with the expertise to potentially be able to do that than somebody else. But ultimately, my feeling as an end user is I want standards. I want your cameras to use an industry standard form factor. And on top of that, don't do something stupid. And I'm not saying Red's doing this because I have no idea. Don't do something stupid like hard lock, devices out based on whether they've met your qualification list or something. It's fine to have a qualification list. It's fine to say we've tested these and we know that these will work with appropriately with the camera. If you don't use these, you're on your own. We can't guarantee that your media will work. But the problem that inevitably comes up with qualification lists is that somebody new comes to the market, or somebody who's been in the market produces a new card that's better than the older cards they have using newer technology or whatever, and it doesn't get qualified. And then you start down this, especially if there's some kind of hardware or software interlock that's looking at model numbers or something like that, device IDs or whatever. Then you start down this road of, well, I have a perfectly functional, perfectly valid piece of media that works in every other device and outperforms its predecessors, but I can't use it in this one device because the one device looks at the qualification list and the company is no longer updating that. And that's never good for the user. So 2 thumbs up to you, Red. Good job. Industry standards. Thank you for choosing industry standards. The other thing that I wanted to very briefly talk about is the mount type that they used. I thought this was very interesting. They used Canon's RF mount. Now, as far as I know, Canon does not license their lens mounts. So nobody, Sigma, Tamron, Tokina, Red, Blackmagic Design, none of these companies go to Canon and say, we'd like to license the RF mount for our new lens or for inclusion on a camera or whatever. Canon says, well, that'll be X number of dollars, and then here we go. As far as I know, Canon has never publicly said that they license their lens mounts. They've never publicly said they're interested in licensing their lens mounts. And in fact, I want to say I've seen something from somebody at Canon somewhere that says that they don't license their lens mounts. Now, this isn't to say that anything you buy that's a Sigma EF lens or somebody else RF lens or whatever is horrible or is going to destroy your camera. What it means, though, is that anybody, especially in the case of like Red, choosing to target the RF mount means it's an investment for them. They're not just because what they have to do is they have to reverse engineer the lens mount. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritties of that because it's not really relevant to this, but it costs money and time and engineering and so forth to reverse engineer anything versus what it costs to license it, have a spec package, have all the information you need, and then just stick it out there. Way easier to license and produce than it is to reverse engineer to produce. So what this means, as far as I'm concerned, is that Red, looking at all the lens mounts that they could choose, including building their own or choosing to use their own or something to that effect, chose the RF mount. And they chose it knowing that they were going to have to reverse engineer it and that it was going to cost money to do so. And I think that speaks volumes of the RF mount as a well-designed mount. Now, I know there's a lot of people who will say, well, that's just because you're a Canon user, that's just because you're a Canon fanboy, whatever. Although I said this when the mount came out, and I said this doubly so when the C70 came out with built-in optical neutral density filters. There are advantages and disadvantages. Everything in engineering is a trade-off. And if you look at my tablet where I have some notes for this, if you look at the various lens mounts that are out there, this is kind of what I really wanted to talk about today, and I'll try not to go on for too long. There is advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons, etc. For example, the granddaddy of the full frame mirrorless mount, Sony Z mount. I know Sony claims that they designed that with fully intending for it to have a full frame sensor in it and blah, blah, blah. And it's easy to claim that, and it's easy to come out after the fact because obviously they have full frame sensors in their cameras, so it's not like they can't do it. But it's easy to come out in a public statement after the fact, after you've done it, when people are saying it's not really designed for that, and say, yes, it was. We really did design it that way. That's how it was. And I'm not going to say they're lying. This isn't an indictment of credibility or anything like that. If you step back and look at the mount, and you look at how tight it is compared to all of the competition, the reality in engineering is nobody designs something intentionally to make their life difficult down the road repeatedly. And that's the problem that I see in the E-mount. Perfectly good. I mean, it works. So like, there's nothing. This isn't an indictment that it doesn't work. It does work, but it's a perfectly good, perfectly comfortable APS-C mount. When you stick a full frame sensor in it, especially if you start talking about in-body image stabilization, you start getting into it being very tight. And you can see this if you ever look at the front, at a picture of the front of a Sony E or a Sony Alpha full frame camera, and say an EOS R or a Nikon Z or a Leica S, or not Leica S, a Panasonic S series, Lumix S series, you can see how much tighter the E-mount is. And all of that has an impact on how lenses have to be designed, how largely on how lenses have to be designed. But I mean, there's other knock-on sort of considerations, and I just don't see, as an engineer, sitting there looking at it and going, when they could easily have added 4 or 5 millimeters to the mount, and it would not have made the early E series point and shoot or mirrorlesses, the APS-C ones, so much bigger that they just couldn't be competitive and couldn't do anything, and they were just terrible, big and ugly and hideous, blah, blah, blah. That really wouldn't have done that. That's the reality. But being in the 50 millimeter diameter range would have made the mount way more comfortable and way easier to design full frame lenses for. Put full frame stuff in the mount. So the trade-off there is that it's a tight mount for a full frame sensor. And in the case of the V-Raptor, they're actually using a 40.96 millimeter wide sensor. The dimensions of the sensor are 40.96 by 21.60 millimeters with a 46.31 millimeter diagonal, which is bigger than full frame. It's at least it's wide aspect, but it's larger than a 35 millimeter film frame would be at that aspect ratio. It's wider than 36 millimeters. Conversely, looking at, just kind of running down my list of notes here, looking at the Nikon Z mount, which I'm not going to say is a bad design. Well, I mean, I'm kind of saying it's a bad design. But there's trade-offs. Nikon made it larger in diameter. Okay, that's great. It's a 55 millimeter diameter mount instead of a 47 millimeter or whatever the F mount was, 48, something like that. I think it was sub 50. And they made it thin. Well, the thin is the problem with the Z mount, and it's probably why somebody like Red would not choose a Z mount, because if you want to put neutral density filters in between the lens mount and in front of the sensor, you need room. And Nikon made a big deal about how when the Z mount cameras first came out, the Z6 or whatever, they had to re-engineer, the Z6 and Z7 had to re-engineer their shutter mechanism to be thinner, to fit between in the new thin lens mount. Of course, there's advantages to a thin lens mount, and there's disadvantages to a thin lens mount. I'm not sure, in looking at it, that the advantages of having a 16 millimeter thick lens mount are that much, or that there are outweigh or are so big that going 2 to 4 millimeters thicker would have not been a better idea. I think Nikon, I really do. I think Nikon, I won't say shot themselves in the foot, but they definitely limited themselves to what they could do, in my opinion, with the Z mount. It's more limiting than other mounts. Well, primarily, it's more limiting than the RF mount. Sort of stepping up, you have the Canon RF and the Leica L. Now, Leica L is an open standard or an open platform. You can join the L Mount Alliance. You basically, it's sort of like 4/3, but for full frame. Yes, I'm in recording this in the middle of a thunderstorm. It's sort of like it's sort of like 4/3, but for full frame. So it's a 51.6 millimeter diameter and 20 millimeter depth, which is not horrible. It's not quite as flexible potentially as the Canon RF mount, but it's certainly better in terms of size, comfort, relaxed with space, etc., than say the E mount, and it has the depth at 20 millimeters. So why do I make a big deal about 20 millimeters? Well, the thing that Canon has shown with the C70 is that you can put neutral density filter wheels in 20 millimeters. 20 millimeters is 4/5 of an inch. It's a pretty. I mean, there's a pretty good amount of depth there, and you can do traditional optical neutral density filters in 20 millimeter depth. C70 did that. 54 millimeter diameter throat gives you from a camera perspective, lens perspective, it's comfortable. It's not forcing an issue. It's not forcing you to make lenses that have to focus out in the corners or have extremely tight tolerances to the mounts to fill the image, or which then can have ramifications in sensor designs. It's a little bit more, it's more relaxed is basically what it is. So of all the mounts that I could see, the only two that I could see, like if I was in Red's shoes, the only two mounts that I would even consider personally are it's the L mount or the RF mount, or creating my own, or sticking with a thicker mount, the EF or PL or something like that. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with sticking with, say, PL or EF, except by going to a mirrorless mount as your fundamental basis, it makes it easier to adapt out to other things. So having the RF mount as the primary mount on the V-Raptor means that you can put an RF to EF adapter on it and go EF. You can go put an RF to PL adapter on it and go PL. It gives you more flexibility as a platform that is a little harder to do. I mean, granted, what you could do with what Red did previously is you could change the whole mount out, but changing out the whole mount, shimming it, getting it properly aligned and everything is a lot more of a hassle than clicking on a mount adapter. So I think that's I think that's what they were going with. And I think between the two, the RF and the L, I'm not going to say they couldn't have gone L. I mean, I think they could have gone L. I think it probably would have worked. It's certainly poised to be able to be, it's got the thickness. It's a little bit tighter, but I'm not sure if that little bit tighter diameter really would pose that problem. So I thought it was very interesting, and this is, I guess, the long and the short of it is, I thought it was very interesting. I almost fell out of my chair when I was scrolling down the V-Raptor page, and I looked the picture of the lens mount and sensor came up. And one thing, if you're ever looking at lens mounts, one thing that's immediately recognizable about Canon's mounts, so EF, EFM, and L, or RF, not L, EF, EFM, and RF, is they have two planes. They're designed in such a way that the signal pins sit further forward than the power pins, so that your signal pins will never touch, or your power pins, your signal contacts and your power contacts will never touch. They're physically isolated because they sit in two different heights from the relative amount. Canon's the only company that that's done that I've seen. It's not a characteristic of the E mount. It's not a characteristic of the Z mount. It's not a characteristic of the L mount. Canon is the only company that I've seen who has that layer of physical protection going on in their communication pins in their mounts. So if you're ever looking at a picture of a lens mount, on a camera or whatever, and the pins are on the bottom of the mount, because that's where Canon puts them, and there's two distinct chunks of pins. It'll either be 3 pins for EF or 4 pins for RF that are set further back or further forward, depending on whether you're looking at which side you're looking at. You're looking at a Canon mount. And it's almost at least to me, having looked at a lot of lens mounts, it's almost instantly recognizable. So anyway, that's what I thought was interesting about the V-Raptor. I kind of want to say I wish Red's success with it. Certainly looks like it could be a good camera. The claimed performance is really nice. Looks really nice. Frame rates look really nice. I think it's kind of amusing in some respects that Red has beaten Canon to the full frame large sensor. I think large sensor is probably a better way to put it. To market with a large sensor cinema camera that uses the RF platform. Now, unfortunately, I know from what I've seen from discussions on other sites, Canon has had to scratch due to the material shortages that we've been seeing in the electronics industry for the last year and a half or 2 years or whatever it is. Canon has had to cancel products that they were going to release and upgrade them with newer, replace them with newer products that are low, that aren't as far along in the development process. So all things being equal, it's entirely possible that Canon might have had a product, a cinema camera that was comparable or competitive with the Red V-Raptor on the market already, except for, like I said, the material shortages causing some stuff to get flipped around. I know they did talk about, almost a year ago now, an 8K camera. I don't remember what lens mount it used. So there's that. And of course, who knows, Canon very easily could be announcing something in the next couple of months. People make a big deal about a couple of months and, first to market and da-da-da-da-da, but, I don't really think it matters that much, quite honestly. I don't think that a couple of months, product announcement differences are that big of a deal when you start talking about this kind of equipment. It may cost a production now, but it's probably not going to cost a production, cost that much in the long term. Anyway, this storm that is currently going does not seem like it's going to be letting up anytime soon. So I'm going to wrap this up here so that I don't have cameras plugged in and running. So yeah, if you found this interesting, let me know by hitting that like button. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, consider subscribing. Remember, if you don't subscribe now, you can't forget to unsubscribe later. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.